Welcome to the Denver Gazette Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Schmaedeke. Today, we're brought to you by Applewood Plumbing, Heating, and Electric. They have been serving Denver residents for 50 years. They are the proud sponsor of this podcast and of the Colorado Avalanche, which we're going to talk about with Kyle Fredrickson today. Kyle, how are you? You enjoying some off-season life a little bit?
Yeah, not gonna lie. It was a game every other night there. What felt like 3 or 4 weeks. So to have some decompression time is has been good, and I think it's also a chance to kind of just digest this season as a whole, right? I mean, a lot of ways to analyze, how the Avalanche got there. But losing in the second round, that isn't what this team expected going in. I think based on the roster they had, they felt they could win a cup, and being in that locker room after game 7, that was the overwhelming takeaway for me. It was a team that was sad, not only because they were out, because they felt, man, this really was a year where they had a group that could do it.
So they lost in double overtime. I guess it was early Saturday morning, technically.
Yeah, it had crossed the Saturday by that point.
That started the rough 48 hours at Ball Arena with the Avs losing 2-1 in overtime in Game 6. But that's interesting. You mentioned the locker room. Does the team kind of feel like, ooh, this was a big missed chance?
A little bit, it's a combination of things. I don't think that anyone in that room would necessarily be surprised that they went out in the second round. And that's just because of the Nichushkin news. I mean, in
Yeah.
the moment, like they're not going to use that as an excuse. But in my mind, it sort of felt like every win that they got after that was just delaying the inevitable. Like I just didn't think that this team was going to win a cup without Val on the roster, because even with him on the roster, like the Stars still looked like a better team for the second half of that series. So yeah, it was disappointment. Every guy handled it a little differently. I think it's the worst for the guys like Zach Parise, where that's his last run. He's said that he's going to retire after the year, and he came back and unretired essentially to win a cup, and he fell short. There's other guys like Jonathan Drew and Andrew Cogliano. They might not be back next year, so it's sort of this sinking in feeling that, all right, like this group that we have now, we're just not going to have in a year from now, just with how the salary cap goes. The Avs are going to have to sign a couple guys to extensions. So I'll be curious what happens, but a somber group. Again, they wouldn't make the excuse about Val, but I do think there was a sense around the team that, all right, like we're not going to be able to do it this year.
So was this Nathan MacKinnon's worst playoff series? God, it sure seemed like it.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at some of his other series from maybe some of their previous runs.
He didn't
But I
seem
will,
like the force that he was
right,
in other
right.
series.
Yeah. I mean, and like if he's the MVP this year, you kind of expected that, right? Like, all right, like when are we going to get these McKinnon games where he takes over? And I will say him and Cale Makar played extremely well in that game 6 or game 5 to force a game 6.
Yeah.
They did step up in that moment, but when it came to that double overtime game, they weren't able to generate more than just one goal. And that's on Nathan MacKinnon, that's on Mikko Rantanen, who did actually score at least in that game, but overall had a pretty ho-hum series. And Cale Makar, I mean, those guys generated so many goals. I think 28 of them in the first round, and then that's as a team, of course. And then in the second round, I think the Avs only had 15 goals. So a big drop, right? And MacKinnon, of course, he's got to deserve some of that blame. I think he would even accept that blame. He mentioned after one or two of those games in the second round that he wasn't very good, and he wasn't. So that's surprising. I don't know. It's the team looked fatigued to me at
Yes.
times in this Star series, which is strange because they came in with more rest than the Stars had. So, just up and down the swings. They weren't able to lead in any of these games. So you could point to a lot of things, but MacKinnon, he deserves at least some share of the blame.
How hard was it? Oh, so two things. They struggled so bad at Ball Arena against the Stars. They lost all three games at Ball Arena. And then Matt Duchene scoring the winner. I can't imagine that crowd was thrilled that night.
Yeah, that was a crazy moment, right? Because earlier in the overtime, or I think it was, yeah, or
The
maybe it
first
was,
overtime
yeah,
was,
in the first
yeah.
overtime, it was Duchesne who got called for the goalie interference. So on that narrative alone, what a moment for him. But yeah, the sadness that Avs fans felt they don't boo him as much as they used to.
Yeah.
I remember a few years ago in a playoff series, it was like every time he touched the puck with Nashville, they were getting on him. So some of that stuff's faded, especially the Avs won their own championship now. But I say good for Matt Duchene, right? Like you can have animosity for the guy if you want for asking for a trade, but what a huge moment to have the game winner against his old team and a fan base that hates him. That was crazy. And yeah, they silenced him, right? And I think all through late in that game, it kind of went from a very loud building to a very nervous building.
Yes.
Exploded at big moments. But on the whole, everyone was sort of saw what was coming, and those OT periods, man, they were looking so tired. Just
Yes.
felt like someone had to get lucky or capitalize on a mistake, and it was just one too many rebounds for the Stars on that possession, and good on Matt Duchene for burying it. A great celebration though. Dropped to both knees,
Yes.
sliding on the ice. You love to see a good celly, and that was worthy, right? I mean, Game 7 winner. Good for the Stars advancing and playing an Edmonton team. And if I'm honest, I see the Stars winning it all,
Yeah.
if not at least getting to the final.
Um, yeah, a very tense 48 hours at Ball Arena, we can say.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, and I think Nuggets and Avs fans have had better weekends. But let's talk big picture a little bit because so besides the cup run, it's either been the first or the second round that this team's been out during this stretch. Are we getting? I mean, are we getting close to a championship window being shut, or is it still open in your mind?
I think it's still open. I mean, the goal every year is to figure out how to surround their star players with the right mix of players, right?
Yeah,
And that was a shame of this year. They did that. Like Jonathan Druin was a hit. Casey Middlestat was a hit. Sean Walker, that trade I think worked out pretty well. He wasn't as good in the playoffs, but another good player. It seemed like they bolstered this roster to make it work. So I do think the championship window is open, but more than ever, this is going to be a challenge for the Avs to build around their stars because they have these two albatrosses hanging over them right now in Val Nichushkin and Gabe Landeskog, right? I mean, that's a lot of salary. I think like $13 million combined in a cap hit for those guys next season, where they're not really sure how that money's going to be spent. I mean, with Val, we can, go on him on another question, but with Landeskog, it just seems like there's optimism he's coming back. They trust him to come back, but there's just zero guarantee that this guy is going to be what he was before. So when you're talking about the championship window and building around McKinnon and Makar, like they need Landeskog to be a stud, right? Like they can't have his big, $7 million cap hit and then he's, producing 20, 30 points. Like that's what kills your championship window when you have to commit salary to a guy who's not a star player. And the Avs have done a really good job of not having like those albatross contracts where it's like, oh, they've got to trade this guy because they owe him so much money. Well, they're going to try to do that with Val. I don't know if it's going to work because you're going to have to find a willing trade partner. But the Avs are going to be in a situation that a lot of other teams are in, and they had done such a good job of avoiding that. So that's a long-winded answer to say, yeah, I think the window's open, but it's creaking closed, right? Like somebody's pulling down on that thing a little bit, and it's hard, right? And I think what Tampa Bay did, winning two in a row and getting to a third, so impressive. I've said it before on the pod, but that's quite the feat.
yeah, that was something else. With Landeskog, this guy hasn't played in 2 years. What can the Avs actually expect from him when he gets back on the ice? If that is October,
Yeah, it's a great question. It's gonna have to be some buildup, right? We've got a long off season to go here. He's past that 12-month mark. He's now going to be approaching that 16-month mark, which is the back end of what people say is the recovery time for this deal. So I don't know. I think the Avs are as in the dark as we are to some degree because he hasn't tested himself enough to know how it's doing. And I think that is to me is the bigger concern. I expected to go into the postseason and to see Gabe's participation
yeah,
ramp up in some form, right? Like he doesn't have to be a full practice guy, but is he going to be in drills? Is he going to be, actively, doing stuff with teammates? And he just hasn't. He's been doing stuff by himself. He's been very slow and deliberate to the point where you're just like, is he going to get past this ever? So we'll see. If he's not practicing with the team in training camp, I don't think it's a huge concern, but it all of a sudden becomes, all right, well, how much of the year does Gabe miss again? Because to your point, hasn't played in 2 years. How much time is this guy going to need to be a legit elite player again? I don't know what the answer is. I don't think the Avs do either, but it's a humongous question in terms of whether or not this group is going to win another cup, because it seems like it's becoming more of a challenge by the season right now.
And the other big question is, of course, Val Nichushkin. Now that the season's over, I mean, the Avs just have. How do the Avs look at this whole thing? Like, do they wait it out for 6 months and see what happens, or have they lost all trust in him? I know that's something we don't really know, but just
Yeah,
thought.
yeah, it's a good question. I wrote about that in the Denver Gazette this week, just analyzing what the Avs can do. And the short answer is their options are limited. Like they can't do a lot. When a guy is in this program, it's a protection, right? Like this is an addiction issue. Like it's not a criminal issue, so they can't terminate his contract while he's in the program. But Val can essentially terminate his own contract in the program, right? Like he's in stage 3 of a 4-stage program where if he messes up again and goes to stage 4, it's a year-long suspension, and then his reinstatement isn't guaranteed. And so the Avs are rooting for this guy, but at the end of the day, if he screws up again and their intentions are to move on from him, that would be the best thing for the Avs, because then all of a sudden that cap space is gone, and he might be done in the NHL for good. So the human elements of course there, Jared is, I think, been pretty good about that throughout the course of talking about Val. But there's also decision making, right? Like this isn't a normal like a guy who has an injury and needs to heal. Like Val made choices and now he's paying the price for them. So wish him the best, but yeah, I think they wait it out. I think 6 months goes by and they'll try to find a trade partner when he's reinstated. Um, I don't know. In some world, maybe there is some trust that's rebuilt there. I just can't imagine that that's the case. Mostly because Nathan MacKinnon has probably lost that trust, right?
Yeah,
And forget like McFarland and the coaching staff. If you don't have McKinnon's trust on this team, you can't play for them. Like
right.
he kind of makes those decisions to some degree. So
That's why
yeah, I
Jonathan
don't know
Gruen was
how
on
the
the
locker room
offense.
gets back on board, even if Val gets better. And if he does get better and they trade him and he gets to another team and he plays great again, what an awesome redemption story,
Yeah.
right? Rooting for the guy 100%. We also don't really know him, right? I mean, we've talked about it before. I have rarely interviewed Val where the conversation lasts more than 2 questions. So we'll see what happens next. He's always been kind of a mysterious guy in terms of who he is and what he's up to. Just being that he's got a family, you just hope he's doing okay.
So our colleague Mark Kisla has talked about Jared Bednar several times in columns. Jared Bednar is the coach of this team, right?
100%. I don't.
Yeah,
I think that when you have Nathan MacKinnon, there's an expectation you're going to be a championship contender every year. So when you
yeah.
don't meet that, yeah, Mark Kisla and other columnists and passionate fans are going to say, we got to make a change. We got to figure something out. And there's some shred of truth to that. I mean, you got to meet the expectations, but I just can't imagine that Joe Sakic and McFarland would want to break up this brain trust, right? Like all these guys have worked together for so long. Jared Bednar is already the third longest tenured coach in the league. He might be the second longest if John Cooper ends up leaving the Lightning. So we'll see what happens there. But I think NHL teams would love to have the sort of consistency that the Avalanche have right now, right? I mean, they're not winning championships every year, but what, they've been in the playoffs 7 years in a row.
Yeah.
They've won a title within the past 3 seasons. They're one of 8 teams still competing for it this season. So I don't know. I mean, I may call me an optimist, but I wouldn't label this season a bust. The way they performed in that Winnipeg series showed me that these guys could have won a title if Val stuck with it and they were able to maintain that pace of play. But the Stars were just better. So a lot of ways to look at it. If you want to be reactionary and blame it on Bednar, I think he'd wear some of the blame. I mean, the coach has to, but I don't think that coaching is the reason they lost the series, right? I mean, I can't point to a moment and be like, oh, Bednar messed that up.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I mean, I think we have lucked out with both ball arena teams and the stability with both of those teams.
Yeah,
And
100%.
it's, I mean, NHL especially, man, guys get canned all the time. It's
Yeah.
insane how quick coaches change in the NHL.
I think the stat this year is like 60% of head coaches got turned over in the NHL this year,
I'm
whether
not
it's guys
surprised at all.
retiring, guys being fired. I mean, that's over half the league. So yeah, that kind of goes back to my point of why would you join that trend and hire some retread or, take a chance on an AHL guy? Well, I will say, man, David Carl coaching the Avalanche, that would be fun. That's a Mark Kisler call. Mark suggested that Landeskog is the next
Yes,
coach.
he did. Yes.
And I don't think that's a terrible take. I think that requires Gabe Landeskog wanting to be the coach.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest disconnect. I don't see that for him, not yet. Give it some time, maybe after, his playing career is for sure done, but he's not ready for that step. So we'll see. I mean, I like Bednar. I think he was great with us in the playoffs. He's very honest. Um, they did make adjustments in that series. Like the power play broke through late
Yeah.
against the Stars. So like if you want to like pick, nitpick at how they coach, like I do think they made some pretty good adjustments. They just weren't better than the Stars. And like I said, without Val, they were just, playing on borrowed time because they just weren't going to make a deep run without their best player. I mean, he was their leading goal scorer. And once again, he's gone. So
So let's move to the offseason a little bit because, of course, the big thing would be maybe trading Val. But anyone else a trade candidate, you think?
A few guys. I think Josh Manson could be a guy that the Avalanche move on from. I'm not. His deal's coming up fairly soon. I think there's a lot of upside with him. Teams would be
He
willing
signed
to.
right after the Cup, right? Didn't he sign a deal
Yeah,
after the Cup? Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. So I think we're coming up on the end of that deal. He could be a guy who's on the move. Just in terms of roster turnover, I think it's gonna be very hard to re-sign Jonathan Drouin, unless he takes a very team-friendly deal. Devon Tays sort of did that, right? I mean, back in October, it's kind of hard to remember now, but he went through the whole summer unsigned, right? Got into
Yeah.
the season. There was a lot of chatter about, entering the last year of his deal if they were going to get something done. And Tays took what I would consider a team friendly contract to stick with this group and play by Cale Makar. And maybe there's a chance that Druin does that with the Avalanche too, right? Because they just don't have a lot of money to work with. I mentioned earlier that the Landeskog and the Nichushkin thing kind of plays into that. But that's a big conversation because Casey Middlestat is going to get an extension. I mean, they traded for him for Bowen Byram. That shows you the sort of piece he is. He was great in the playoffs, better than I think what a lot of people expected. So tons of upside there. But outside of that, I don't know if too many trade candidates. But we'll see. I think Sam Girard has played himself into being 100% an everyday player for this team, especially with Bo Byram getting sent out, and so maybe Sam Malinsky comes in and gets more minutes if the Avs move on from Jack Johnson, potentially another veteran in the room. So we'll see what happens, but I don't expect the makeup of this team to be the same. They're gonna have to figure out how to be thrifty, especially with the middle stat extension coming up.
What do you think he gets, Middlestat, as a contract?
I don't know. It's hard to guess. I mean, they gave Miles Wood a 6-year deal.
Yeah.
And I think I can't remember what the term is exactly on that one, but I would expect it to be like between 2 and 4 million a year. Would be my guess for that second line center. I think that's second line money. And the term is a big thing, right? He's a younger player, so he's gonna want a lot of years, the guy that they're gonna build around, but the Avalanche probably want a little bit of flexibility. So we'll see. But I do think that, among the press releases that we're going to see come out over the next month or so, that'll be one of the first ones because the Avs have got to prioritize that so they can figure out what else to do.
What's Sean Walker's deal?
That's a good question. I can
I think
look it
he's
up.
still, is he restricted or is Middlestat's restricted?
Yeah, Middlestat is restricted, right? And so that's the thing. They can meet, uh, obviously,
They can,
another team's deal there. It looks like
right.
Sean Walker. Sean Walker's making 2.6. Oh, you're right, and he is a unrestricted free agent, so they're gonna have to either extend him or decide to move on. That's a good catch, Chris. I forgot about that one.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm trying to think, who did they trade for? They traded, why can't I
That
remember?
was that was unloading Ryan Johansson,
Ryan
right?
Johansson, that's
So
right.
that
Yeah, I
was
can't
like a
remember.
salary dump.
Yes.
They gave up a first round pick as well. For Sean Walker, who's, I think for being a third pair defenseman is has a higher ceiling than that. Tough
Yeah.
on this team. But he's a candidate for a guy who could move up, in that pecking order if Josh Manson is a guy who gets sent out.
So we don't even know who has won the cup yet, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I mean, next season the Avs will be a favorite again. I'm sure.
Oh, 100%,
Yeah.
100%. And Vegas loves this team. Like we've
Yes, they do.
talked about it. For whatever reason, they seem to really like their odds. Like the Avs for the most of the regular season were Cup favorites. So I would expect that to continue. I mean, they've got all their core coming back, and when you have a McKinnon and a McCarr, guys who are arguably the best at their positions, yeah, you're gonna see that. So yeah, I don't, if you're an Avalanche fan and a Nuggets fan, I mean, you're set up for success, right? Like these are postseason teams that have titles, and it's just incredibly difficult to repeat. I saw that NBA stat. It's like the last five champions were out in the second round.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it's I think with
Nuggets
the
made it 6. Yeah.
yeah, I think the NHL has a similar number of those guys outside of a few years where it's just tough to make another run.
Well, you even look back when the Avs had their good years in like the early 2000s, or even when they won the first cup. Like I think they lost in the first round the next year, if I'm not mistaken.
Mhm.
So I mean, it's so hard to repeat. It just doesn't happen anymore. Well, then who do you have? Who do you have winning the two conference finals and meeting in the Stanley Cup?
Yeah, I am probably going to predict a Stars Rangers final with the Stars winning it all in a long series. I just think they have the depth and the goaltending to do it. That group just they can play any style of hockey. They were able to shut down an Avs team that just throttled the Jets. So I think they found a combination that's really working for them. Miro Heiskanen on the back end is kind of a Kale McCarr light. Like they just have all the pieces, I think, to make a run. And Pete DeBoer is a great coach. I've
Yes.
enjoyed listening to him on his post game comments. He's very thoughtful. So I think a lot of people across the NHL are rooting for him. A guy who's been very close with multiple teams, but never won that thing. So that'd be my prediction. It's a little bit of that should make Avs fans feel a little better, right? If the team that knocks you out wins it. Or maybe you feel worse. I don't know. It's harder for
I,
me to tap into the fan psyche sometimes.
I don't know, but I'm wondering how much the NHL really wants Edmonton to win that series.
Oh, one bajillion percent. Yeah. I mean, they need that to some degree to help market their stars. And it is an indictment of the Oilers if they can't get it done, right? I mean, it's a talented team. They've,
They won Game
gone for
7 in
that.
Vancouver.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. They've shown a lot of resilience. So we'll see. I'll enjoy watching them as a spectator for sure. Just enjoying some great hockey because man, being on deadline for a double overtime game, not my favorite experience ever.
I got to imagine if it would be Oilers Rangers, the NHL would possibly throw a party.
Yeah, they would. The ratings would get a huge boost for sure.
All right, Kyle, thanks for coming on and kind of recapping the season and looking forward. You have a story on Gabe Landeskog on DenverGazette.com right now. Is that correct?
Yeah, just updating fans on the latest what we know about Gabe. Obviously, he didn't play this year. Jared Bednar had, I thought, some pretty illuminating comments after Game 7. Just kind of getting through all that post game stuff, just to kind of relay how is Gabe's doing and what his mindset is. Also checking in with Lonzo Ball, right, with the Bulls. He's was on his podcast and gave an update of how he's doing. The fact they both had the same injury,
Yeah.
the same surgery, I should say kind of puts them in a unique class of where everyone's sort of watching how they do because this is unprecedented, right? Like no one's ever had this cartilage transplant and return to being a truly elite athlete. It's even ended some guys' careers. So wishing the best for Gabe, but right now, they're shooting for game 1 of next season. And like I mentioned earlier, even if it's after that, would not surprise me, but it sure feels like this guy is doing everything in his power at this point to play. And I imagine it is just killing him,
Yeah.
watching this team lose in the playoffs earlier than a lot of people expected while he's on the sidelines. So we'll probably get to talk to Gabe at some point before the start of next season. But for now, like I mentioned, if you go on Denver Gazette, a lot of interesting stuff from Jared Bednar there.
Gabe Landeskog and Lonzo Ball. That's a pair I never thought would
Yeah, yeah, they
consider.
that'd be interesting drinking buddies, right? I'd be a fly in the wall. That'd be good.
All right, make sure to subscribe to this podcast on Apple or on Spotify. Check out Kyle's stuff at denvergazette.com as well as coverage of all of our other teams. And Kyle, we'll probably won't catch up for a while. We'll probably catch up when we get kind of close to free agency and some offseason news.
Sounds good, man.